This is a production of PBS Charlotte.
This week on Unspun, what happens next as President Biden ends his campaign for re-election and Donald Trump brings his campaign right here to Charlotte? Can Kamala Harris recapture momentum for the Democrats? And how does Harris versus Trump shape up right here in North Carolina? I'll also have the top 5 major changes that will occur in the presidential campaign after a week of trouble and turmoil. Unspun is next on PBS Charlotte. In today's America, welcome to the spin game. Believe me, I know, I'm Pat McCrory. When I was governor and mayor, I played the spin game. I was played by the spin game. But aren't we all done being spun? Let's take the spin out of the world we're in, here on Unspun. Good evening. I'm Pat McCrory, and welcome to Unspun, a show that tells you what politicians are thinking but not saying. Boy, what a difference a week makes. There were exactly 7 days between the assassination attempt on Donald Trump and Joe Biden's decision to quit his campaign for president. 7 days that changed everything, right? Well, maybe not. Republicans wondered if Trump's near-death experience would change Trump himself into a kinder, gentler candidate. Well, here's what we saw at Trump's rally in Charlotte this week.
I was supposed to be nice. They say something happened to me when I got shot. I became nice. And when you're dealing with these people, they're very dangerous people. When you're dealing with them, you can't be too nice. You really can't be. So if you don't mind, I'm not going to be nice. Is that okay? I'm not. They want me to be nice.
And while Democrats hope to change the race for president by changing candidates, will voters really see a difference? Here's Kamala Harris in Fayetteville.
Do we want to live in a country of freedom, compassion, and rule of law? Or a country of chaos, fear, and hate?
So how will all these campaign changes affect us right here in North Carolina? Joining us now is Brad Crone. He's a veteran Democratic political strategist based in Raleigh with 35 years of experience managing campaigns all over the Southeast. Brad's also the president of Campaign Connections, a North Carolina political consulting firm. Brad, it's great to have you on here on Unspun.
Great. Thank you for having me.
So much has changed in the last 2 weeks politically. What's the biggest change that's going to impact North Carolina politics? We've had the assassination attempt, we've had Biden resigning, and we've had Harris as the VP pick. How does that impact the Democrats' chances in North Carolina?
Pat, I've been to Ringling Brothers Circus. I have been to the State Fair. I've been to a hog killing in Johnston County. And I have never seen anything like the politics we've witnessed over the last 2 weeks. I mean, it's just been an absolute tornado of activity. And what it's done, I believe, Pat, has energized both bases deep. The Republican base with Trump's attempted assassination and Biden dropping out. For the Democrats, the one thing to really note is that the Democrats went from a death march with Biden on the ticket and saying that he was going to continue to be on the ticket, to his withdrawal, and the withdrawal stimulating energy, excitement, and enthusiasm. An example, $251 million in 48 hours for Kamala Harris to raise absolutely unprecedented numbers. 1.1 million donors, many of them, over 60% of them, are new donors for the Democrats. So the base for the Democrats really energized.
So behind the scenes, real quick, behind the scenes during the last 2 months, especially after the debate, behind the scenes were the Democrats hoping for a change without saying it because they needed to be respectful to the president. Were they hoping for a change?
Clearly, Pat. Listen, you really saw the concern at the top of the ticket with Josh Stein's campaign, with Rachel Hunt's campaign, and with Jeff Jackson's campaign. Because the fact, when Emerson College released a poll last week and it had Trump up 9 points, there was pure panic breaking out behind the scenes with the Democrats, because they knew for certain that if Trump wins the state by 5 points or 6 points, the governor's mansion's in jeopardy. Mark Robinson would win. Hal Weatherman would win the lieutenant governorship. And more than likely, Dan Bishop would win the attorney general's position. So the Democrats were clearly supportive of Biden dropping out. Now, they had to be delicate. They had to be genteel. But there was a big gasp of relief when Biden announced on Sunday that he was getting out. And here's the back end of it. If the Democrats can remain competitive in the state where the race is a point and a half, as you know from 2016, Trump won the state by 3.25% and Cooper won by 10,000 votes. So the Democrats really do think that if you keep it super close, then they've got a shot at being competitive in the top 3 council of states.
In fact, one thing
if Biden had not dropped out, probably the only Democrat remaining was going to be Elaine Marshall on the Council of State. So clearly, big relief for the Democrats.
So another big thing going on is Governor Cooper is being considered as a VP candidate. Behind the scenes, do you think it's a real option versus Shapiro and the Arizona senator and the Wisconsin governor and others? Is this a real thing that could happen right here in North Carolina?
No, I think that he's on the short list. I would say he's probably on the top 4 with Shapiro from the governor from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Mark Kelly from Arizona, Roy Cooper, and possibly J.B. Pritzker. Also here, the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, is on the list as well. The FBI is doing background checks on the governor at this point in time. He is being vetted. The interesting thing, that the backside of that story, Pat, is that Roy and Kamala have been very good friends since they served together as attorney generals. So they have a relationship. It is both political and personal. She knows him, and Roy comes out of central casting for the Democrats from the standpoint that he comes from Eastern North Carolina. He's risk averse. He is a former Sunday school teacher, Morehead scholar. He fits he clicks all the boxes for the Democrats.
And he's very careful. He's very careful and strategic in what he says. I think it's a great strength of his.
Totally.
So one of the things that I assume Harris is going to be considering in this pick with Arizona, with Michigan, with Wisconsin, with Pennsylvania, is whoever they pick, can they at least carry their own state, unlike Al Gore could do in Tennessee? Can Roy Cooper carry North Carolina, or do you really think it'll make much of a difference?
Well, that's going to be the big question mark. The interesting thing for the Democrats is that Roy's never lost an election in the state of North Carolina.
Believe me, I know that.
Entering the state house in the early 1980s, his state senate runs, his attorney general runs, his gubernatorial campaigns. He has never lost an election in the state of North Carolina. And can he get Democrats energized? The interesting dynamic that I see about Roy Cooper is that he doesn't have the Jim Hunt political network that the Hunt machine had in the 70s and again in the 90s. But what Roy does have in the state is a donor network that is able to generate a whole bunch of campaign cash, and the presidential campaign may be interested in that.
Now, let me interrupt you real quick. Let me interrupt you real quick. The difference, too, with Jim Hunt in comparison is Jim Hunt running statewide could win an election. People vote differently. The swing voter votes differently on a federal election, as I've learned, than they do a state election. So could the same thing apply to Roy Cooper, where statewide he gets a lot of support until he moves to the federal level?
Yeah, and Jim Hunt saw that in 1984 with the Jesse Helms race. You saw that in your primary race. Clearly, the question's going to be, will Kamala be able to excite those independent, unaffiliated voters in the wraparound counties, in the suburban counties, in towns like Monroe and Thomasville, Burlington, Clayton, and Fuquay-Varina and Jacksonville? That's going to be the real big question mark. And will she be able to defend her record on inflation and immigration?
All right.
Does Roy add to that equation? That's going to be a real big component to that.
In the remaining minute or so, the governor's race. Stein was obviously had to be concerned. Robinson was not at the rally in Charlotte this past week. What do you see there? Is it Robinson didn't want to be attached to Trump, or Trump doesn't want to be attached to Stein? Because you know the history of politics. Sometimes Cooper didn't even want to be attached to Obama during certain times. I didn't want to be attached to Bush in 2008. It's a unique dynamic, isn't it?
It truly is a unique dynamic. It's intriguing to me with Robinson being such an endorser and supporter of Trump that he would not make the visit. I would assume that he had some type of scheduling conflict. That race, Pat, is going to be super close. It will be just as close as the race that you faced in 2016. It may be even closer than that. I think it will be very, very narrow and could go either way at this point in time. I think that it's intriguing in the sense that Robinson's making his case largely about the economy, and Stein and the Democrats want to make it a campaign about social issues, in particular women's reproductive rights. So it will be interesting to watch as we move forward. The real dynamic will be what the unaffiliated voters do in the I-85 corridor from Charlotte to Raleigh.
Brad, you gave us a real good insight, and I really appreciate you being on the show. And we're going to follow up to see if some of your predictions and analysis came true.
Look forward to it.
It's time now for PBS Charlotte's Jeff Sonnier to take Unspun on the street to hear what you're thinking about what's next in the race for president.
Yeah, we're here in Charlotte at Donald Trump's first campaign event since Joe Biden dropped out of the campaign. And not surprisingly, well, Trump's not the only one here at the Coliseum who's talking about it.
As you know, 3 days ago, we officially defeated the worst president in the history of our country, crooked Joe Biden.
Did you expect that it would be Trump versus Harris instead of Trump versus Biden?
Absolutely not. But we kind of saw the writing on the wall. We know that the man is not well mentally, and that is their only go-to right now.
I think it'll make Donald Trump stronger, and I think that he'll gain more supporters from the chaos in the Democratic.
It was interesting to watch the machine of the Democrat Party choose their candidate the way they did. It'll be interesting, and I think this year is just a special political science story for generations to come.
Together, we will win North Carolina in an epic landslide. We're way ahead in the polls.
Well, I think it'll be a fairly tight election. I don't know if it'll be a landslide. It would have to take a lot of people to change over to Trump, which, you know, probably won't happen.
Do you think Mr. Trump will run a different campaign now that he's running against a different opponent?
Oh, yeah. I think he has to change it up a bit, right? You have to change the optics. So, yeah, he will change the optics. How he'll change them, I do not know.
Well, I believe you cannot take a bullet for democracy and not have your intensity and fierceness of the message change, right?
Yeah, we're also seeing tighter security here at the Coliseum compared to earlier Trump rallies here in the Charlotte area. Of course, this particular event, only the second Trump rally since the attempt on his life up in Pennsylvania. Pat?
Thanks, Jeff. So what do you think about the changes in the presidential race? Email us your thoughts to unspun@WTVI.org. Okay, tonight on our top 5 countdown, we've got the 5 major changes in the presidential campaign after the Trump assassination attempt and the Biden decision to quit. So what are the 5 things that I predict are going to happen in the next several weeks after these 2 major events? Well, number 5. Trump will suddenly be the old guy. You know, during the past several months, the Republicans have been going after Biden and going, "You're too old. You're too old." Now, all of a sudden, the Democrats are repivoting and going to the Republicans. "You're the old guy now." It's an amazing change in dynamics. Number 4, retail politics will be limited due to security. Well, the Secret Service hearings were a disaster, and now the Secret Service head just resigned. So what's going to happen? Well, I'll tell you what I think is going to happen. First of all, going to be very few, if any, outdoor events, and there'll be fewer events. And for those events, they'll be inside, like right here in Charlotte. Number 3, VP choices could help or hurt both parties. History tells us that VPs really don't have an impact on campaigns. However, think about Sarah Palin and the decisions and the things she said about, I can see Russia. Little comments like for a VP candidate that hurt a campaign can impact a very close campaign. Win or lose, a VP can have more of a negative impact than a positive impact on a campaign. Number 2, both candidates will ignore the deficit. The deficit is the #1 political issue that politicians don't want to talk about. It's in the millions and trillions of dollars, and yet there's no easy answer. All the easy answers are not politically viable. You'll lose the campaign if you give them the real answers. They're not going to talk about the deficit. And number 1, this is the one that really disturbs me and should disturb everyone. Dark money super PACs will control the messaging. And by the way, media stocks will soar because there'll be so much dark money in this campaign. There'll be commercial after commercial after commercial on network TV, on the internet, you name it. They will have so much money to spend, but it's going to be run by dark money organizations that the actual campaigns by law cannot control. PBS Charlotte's Jeff Sonnier joins me now for Unspun One-on-One. Well, Jeff, not much going on.
Yeah, just a quiet week, right? These questions come from the week's headlines and also from our topic this week as well. I ask them and you answer them. That's why we call it One-on-One. I want to follow up on something you spoke with Brad Crone about just a few moments ago in your interview with him. But first, let's take a look at an interview I did at the Trump rally this week with the chairman of the National Republican Committee. Let's take a look. How important is that photo op with the president and the candidate for governor side by side on stage?
Well, I think it's important for any candidate, really, that wants to succeed in North Carolina to let the voters know that they support President Trump, that they stand with President Trump. And so, you know, President Trump really is going to drive the ticket here, and he's going to drive turnout here. So I think it's an important shot for him. So you've got the national chairman saying that Robinson's going to be there on stage with the president, and that's so important for his campaign. And then he doesn't show up. How do you explain that?
I can't. It's a shocker. And what's also interesting, here you have the governor of the 9th largest state, or the lieutenant governor running, and if anything, he maybe should have introduced Donald Trump instead of Richard Childress. He was nowhere to be seen, not even in the pre-speeches that occur 30 or 40 minutes way before the president arrives.
All the other Republican candidates had their moment to speak and had their introduction from the president.
So I don't know. It could be one of two factors. One is Trump doesn't want to be associated with Robinson, or Robinson doesn't want to be associated with Trump. I doubt the latter. So this happens in politics too. When I was running 08 against Beverly Perdue, right after I won the primary, President Bush calls me up in my car. And he goes, I want to come down and do a fundraiser for you in Raleigh. Well, President Bush at the time was at 35% approval rating. We didn't want him. I loved the guy, but it would hurt us. And of course, I said, absolutely, Mr. President. You know, these are the dynamics. It can work for or against either the federal candidate or the state candidate. Roy Cooper in the past always avoided the presidential ticket, even President Obama, because he was going after the swing voter. In an election like mine, between 10,000 votes is the victory over 4.6 million. It can make a difference. So what you don't hear from the candidates is the maneuvering of who should I attach to and who shouldn't I attach to on both sides of the aisle. It's really an incredible dynamic. And I don't know if that's what occurred here in Charlotte or not.
Yeah, there's something going on behind the scenes. We just don't know what it is right now. Yeah. Hey, you mentioned Beverly Perdue. When you ran for governor against her the second time, she dropped out of the race.
Well, that was the first time.
Oh, that's right, the first time.
First time, right, in 08.
Well, you ran against Perdue the first time. The second time around, she was the sitting governor that was supposed to be running for re-election. She pulled her name off the ballot, said she didn't want to run. primarily because of low polls, and you wound up running against Walter Dalton and winning.
Yeah.
Does that compare to what's going on now in the Trump versus Harris race? The candidate you think you're going to run against versus the candidate that you wind up running against, how did it change your race?
It didn't change my race at all. In fact, it made it easier because it made my race easier because the power of the governorship did not have an impact. And Dalton didn't have that big swing when the power was transferred between Perdue and Dalton. And frankly, Beverly Perdue was a tough opponent for me. She was a daggum good. She was the best debater I had to deal with in all my elections. So I was relieved that she was out of the race, but she could read the polls too. And it really had nothing to do with her. It had to do with the economy at the time. And we were in a tough recession, and whoever was in office at the time was blamed for that recession. So it was an interesting dynamic. At this time, I see Harris having the whole machinery behind him, but it's for different reasons. It's because of Biden's health and his energy, and she's bringing obviously new energy.
And new money too, obviously, yeah. What about new issues? Because you've got a woman at the top of the ticket, does that mean abortion becomes more important? Because you've got a African American at the top of the ticket, does that mean other issues? Does that energize your base?
Yes. Having a woman on the ticket makes it more difficult for the male. I had that same issue with Beverly Perdue. It's tougher to attack. You have to be attacked in a different way. And it's just the way it is. You have to be very sensitive. But the fact of the matter is, social issues, she'll be able to talk more about social issues like abortion as a woman easier than a man can. It'll be interesting how Trump deals with that dynamic. And right now, he's going after her like he did after Hillary. And it'll be interesting if she can withstand those attacks. And by the way, she's going after Trump too. It's going to be a no nice person debate. Notice I didn't say nice guy. It's a nice person
no
debate.
More Mr. Nice Guy, no more
neither
Mr.
one of them.
Nice
And behind the
person.
scenes, the other people behind the scenes, the 28 and 35-year-olds who are out in the ground, they're going to be doing everything they can to raise the negatives of the opponent.
When the last debate happened, we all assumed that would be an issue all the way through to November. Now it's not an issue anymore. What about the next debate? How important is that going to be, Trump versus Harris?
It'll be huge. And Trump wants more debates because I think after watching Harris in the presidential debates in the primary against Biden and other Democrats, she did not do well. Although she had her pre-planned lines. Remember, I'm that girl in that picture? So she was pre-planned, but it kind of backfired. But a lot of people say she is now better. I think the big issue for both Trump and Harris will be, when will they get off the teleprompter and do one-on-one interviews like this without their scripts, without their sound bites, and be able to talk in details about foreign policy, about the deficit, about crime, about immigration, beyond the sound bites that both are giving on their speeches right now. Right now, it's a sound bite campaign, hoping to get their sound bite on nightly news.
And I want to follow up with what you said in your top five about retail politics and fewer events because of security after Pennsylvania. How does that change an election when you don't have the one-on-one with the actual people, when it's all sound bites and online and that sort of thing?
I think it hurts Trump more because Trump thrives with that. In his base, I mean, he's come to Charlotte many times during the past many years, and yet he drew an enormous crowd, as you saw.
Yeah, huge.
I mean, it was just huge crowd and people wanting to get in. Harris probably won't draw as big as crowds, but Obama did, by the way. So it'll be interesting if she starts drawing crowds the way Obama did. Or will they be more small hallways where they try to make it look like there's a big crowd versus really being a big crowd? There's a lot of political dynamics and how you set up a room. Believe me, I've done that too. You want the cameras to make it look like there's a full room. And it's very well staged.
Yeah,
do you think there's politics in staging?
Not at all. I've walked into some of those campaign events where a small crowd in a big room. It's much better to have a big crowd in a small room.
And the big thing is putting people behind you too, which is a kind of a new trend now. But you got to be careful what those people are doing behind you.
Hey, we're out of time. Thanks again. That's This Week One-on-One.
This week on Unfiltered, let's talk about how political hate speech turns into action. Back in the old days of politics, I loved it when someone would approach me and ask, "Are you Pat McCrory?" I'd say, "Sure, how are you?" No hesitation at all. But these days, it's a lot harder to be friendly when that same question, "Are you Pat McCrory?" could lead to verbal abuse or even a physical assault. I've been out of public now for 8 years, and it still happens today. Strangers getting in my face and cussing me out for some political disagreement from years ago. Which brings us to the assassination attempt 2 weeks ago. We still don't know why Donald Trump was the target. We don't know why the shooter's phone also had info about the Democratic National Convention. What we do know is that strangers and even friends can't seem to talk politics anymore without making it hateful and personal. It happens at your school, at your job, even in your family relationships. The media, educators, entertainers, and both political parties all have a hand in promoting this political hate speech. And when a 20-year-old brings a gun to a political rally, we all have to wonder, when you say you hate the police or public officials like a judge or a former governor or a presidential candidate, is hate speech partly to blame when a life is lost or when a shooter makes history for all the wrong reasons? And that's the reality as I see it. Thanks for joining us. I hope you'll come back next week as we explore the politics of problem solving. We'll ask Senator Thom Tillis why nobody in politics wants to make a deal anymore, and I'll count down the top 5 issues that both parties in Washington refuse to compromise on. That's on our next Unspun, where we'll tell you what politicians are thinking but not saying. Good night, folks.
Production of PBS Charlotte.